Welcome back to another episode of the Shared Practices podcast. This is that book club format that we started last week. And we have a really interesting set of books. And there is a caveat with this. There is a warning going into this episode. This may be triggering. This may start off some deep introspection and some journeying. But I really enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed everyone's willingness to share and go deep, and I think you will as well. They're not all going to be this intense, but this one got good. So hope you enjoy it. And if you're interested in sharing a book and doing a book club like this, post on our Facebook group, and I'd love to get together and we'll make it happen. So here we go with another episode of the Shared Practices Book Club. Okay, welcome to the second book club of the Shared Practices podcast. Um, Being self-help junkies, which I think we are, except for apparently Aaron, one of our student interns, cannot read a self-help book. He can listen to our podcast, but he can't read a self-help book. Um, Internally, I feel like people who would be listening to a podcast like this would also want to know good leadership books, good self-help books, books that have helped them improve their lives. And so we've put together this format of sharing the best of, or and more importantly than like the best, or like the best book, from a perspective of like a neutral third party. More important than that is books in the context of our life and what they meant to us and how they changed us. And I think that always creates a more compelling story for why someone would want to read the book, is seeing the impact that it's had on that person. Uh, so we have with us today three amazing guests that I'm very grateful that are here. Let's start with Dr. Hunter Bennett. He is an endodontist, a very good friend of mine. We went to undergrad together, technically, though we didn't know each other at the time, and then dental school, pulled many an all-nighter together during our all 4 years of trying to get through dental school, and just a great friend. Welcome to the show, Hunter.
Hey, thanks, Richard. Good to be on. I remember the birth of the podcast all the way back to brainstorming the seasons and the formatting. So it's cool to see what's happened, and it's been amazing. So good job, man. Glad to be on.
Thanks, man. No, it's good to have you here, and I'm excited. I feel like some of our best conversations happen at like 3 a.m. when we're sleep deprived and we're avoiding studying. So if we can just like channel that right now, then I think it'll be good.
Yeah, I just told you I just was out on the boat with my kids for the first time, and so I'm definitely I'm approaching that 3 a.m. weariness, I could say. So hopefully we can channel some of that.
Between children and son, you're there.
I'm there, and puppy, so all good.
Oh yeah, Hunter also got a new dog within the last month, right?
Yeah.
As his family almost or left for a trip. So you're then home alone with the dog, but then you got to go practice. So you're like, did you take the dog to a sitter, or did you take the dog to the practice?
The dog did one day in the practice, and then was at a sitter for the remaining.
That did not work. That plan did not.
Did not. Well, our girls did amazing watching her, but yeah, she ended up being with a sitter for about a week and a half, which was during the day was fine. So
nice. Well, cool. Well, let's introduce our other guest here. We have with us Murray Lowe. Welcome to the show. If any of you don't know who Murray is, you can start the book club off early at the beginning of the season by listening to. We did 6 episodes on crucial conversations. Very deep knowledge in organizational behavior, coaching, consulting. I've introduced him many times, so I'm probably butchering it this time. But welcome to the show, Murray.
Great to be back, and particularly with a group of distinguished colleagues here. I really look forward to seeing what I'm going to learn today here.
This will be fun. Okay, cool. And then lastly, we have soon-to-be Dr. Tyler Tolbert. Welcome to the show.
I hope it's soon. I am very happy to be here, Richard. I have a lot more time on my hands nowadays, what with everything going on with school, or not going on with school, rather. So I'm humbled to be amongst all you guys, and just happy we put all this together, and we're keeping it going.
Awesome. Well, thanks for kicking it off last week. I loved it last week, and that's why we're doing it again. So I'm going to start us off with a book I've read recently. I read this book as I was coming to Indiana to do medical recruiting. It's a book called Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And David Goggins, talking about language, just because 3 of the 4 of us here are belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There are a lot of F-bombs in this book. So if that's of concern to you, just know, don't listen to this audiobook or read this book to your kids at night. Um, yeah, yeah, he is a very passionate man, and David Goggins, he grew up in Indiana. So it was kind of a lot of relevance for me. In Brazil, Indiana, grew up in a predominantly white town, and as an African American man, faced racism, faced challenges, faced um, some difficult circumstances in his family, and had a lot that he overcame. And as he got older, he realized he was at a certain point in his life where he was like he was spraying for pest control. He was like 280 pounds, depressed, life not going well, which I can relate to that. When I lived in Indiana earlier, like I didn't like Indiana. I like Indiana now, but when I first was here, and so he decided to get his act together and dropped 100 pounds in a very short period of time, like 2 or 3 months, and joined the Navy and passed the test just barely because there's these minimums on joining when you take the ASVAB, the aptitude test for joining the military. Cleared the minimums and so that he could go to SEAL training and had to do SEAL training multiple times. He tells the whole story in the book, but basically transforms himself and goes from someone who lacked discipline in a lot of areas of his life and is now like an ultra runner, and he was an Army Ranger and a Navy SEAL and an Air Force something. I'm sorry, all the Air Force people that I can't remember what your special forces thing is. Um, and but it's interesting, like I've had to go through these times of losing weight and getting in shape, nothing to the extreme of Goggins. I've also had to go through these times where I've had to kick things in high gear, and this book to me made me realize I personally he has this thing with like an accountability mirror at night where he sits down with himself and says, did I actually do today and achieve today what I really could have? And I feel like a lot of my angst and guilt is around feeling like I could have done more and I didn't. Um, and and he does a good job of channeling that into something productive. So that's something that I've always struggled with, and so I read this book and I think like, "Oh, I need to be more like David Goggins," and I don't rise to that all the time. I'm not as extreme or as hardcore, and sometimes that has to come from some deep place of desire of, like, wanting to prove someone wrong or wanting to achieve something, and there have been times in my life where I've tapped into that gear, and there are times in my life when I feel like I've lost that gear. And I read this book when I felt like I had kinda lost that gear of the ability to pull all-nighters or, cram more into my life than, um, I thought I could. So, I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling at this point, but has anyone ever had, either side of that, where they have a time in their life where they do more and they achieve more by, like, pushing yourself? It's a very push yourself type book. So I guess first off, has anyone actually read this out of you 3?
I have not.
I haven't read it, but I've listened to a bunch of podcasts with him and seen a bunch of
Yeah.
his videos, and he's obviously a super inspirational guy. He just knows his. What I really enjoy about him is he talks about, because he's got a great physique. He's really physically strong. But one thing he stresses a lot that I really enjoy is he talks about how just it's really mental. He talks about training your brain, and your brain's got to be so strong, and your mind's got to be strong. And he just talks about, it's like 80 to 90% of it is training your mind. And I feel like, in my minuscule running attempts compared to his, I think about that often, where your body kind of starts to shut down, and really, 90% of it's mental. And I think that can be applied not only to physical things, but work. Like there's times I'm at the practice and it's like, oh man, I got like one more stack of papers and it'd be really nice to check out, but I don't know. Yeah, maybe not a perfect connection there, but I think it applies, just really in anything where it's just that discipline. It's that mentality of really wanting to dig deep and just kind of find out what you're made of.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's even a chapter in the book where he decides to run an ultra, like a 100-mile ultra, but it's on a track. So it's like a mind-numbing, just like loop after loop after loop for a charity cause, but he doesn't train for it. And he powers through his first 100-mile ultramarathon race out of just sheer grit and like determination. I, I also think there's kind of a danger in like um, relying purely on motivation. So, Murray, I see you're kind of nodding your head there. What do you think the danger is?
Well, the danger is you lose who you are. I believe we need grit. And in fact, this book reminds me of one of the latest management books called Extreme Ownership, again, written by a former Navy SEAL. And people believe, and again, I've heard executives and leaders say that, if our people just wanted it badly enough, they'd make it happen, believing that our world really breaks down into grit and self-determination and self-will. And I am not there. I think as a type A, I was a type A person and very much driven to be all I could be and do everything I could do. And, and a number of things. And then I had a midlife crisis when I was 29 years old, when all of a sudden it didn't work for me anymore. So I think if you're not centered, if you don't know who you are, and depending on the type of person you are, driving yourself that hard isn't always healthy. I'm not sure it's healthy emotionally. I'm not sure it's healthy physically. Now, don't get me wrong. I do believe you need to find, deep inside what motivates you, and you need to act on that. And you do need to find a way to connect your actions to your beliefs and your values. We all live morally disconnected from our values. I'm not a big fan of the grit, kind of the tough it out, mental toughness thing, because I worry that many of the people that you work with in your practices don't share that mindset. If you have that mindset and no one else in your practice has that mindset, how are you going to connect to them, and how are they going to connect to you? So again, there is a certain percentage of the population that is, the grit, the mental toughness, positive mental attitude. I've got to have that. And I just be careful, particularly now. I'll give you two caveats where this can really run into problems. Might be your personal life, might be with your partner, your spouse, or your kids. I talk to executives all the time, and most executives I speak with are kind of type A, achievement oriented people. And I asked them, I said, if you have kids who aren't achievement oriented, who are, artsy or people oriented, right? If you have people who you love dearly, and you can't come down from that positive, that positivity and grit, you may lose some people in your life that are important to you. So anyway, love the book, love the concept, particularly in the sense that for him, that was what he needed to be. And so again, I'm not saying you don't need to be who you are. And for some people to kick their butt in gear is a good thing. My assumption is that most dentists already have something going for them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have got into dental school, right?
Right.
They wouldn't have made it as far as they've made it again. So like the concept, little less of a fan of the grit. If I just try hard enough, I can do anything. Sometimes you can't do things, right?
Well, and I think that's a great point, that there is both a dark side to this where you can burn relationships, you can burn out, you can injure yourself, you can do real damage to your body, and he even recently has had some health things and has kind of stepped back a little bit from some of the intense positions he's taken on stuff. Um, and I think there are kind of seasons and phases of your life. For me, my season of that kind of grit, especially, there's two of them. One was trying to get into dental school, coming with, I had like 3 Fs in undergrad and I needed to kick it in high gear and get in. And then another was starting the podcast in residency. Both of those for me, were kind of these intensity filled periods of my life. But I have also then had time periods after those where I didn't have the same. I felt burnt out and sometimes depressed, and so there is a cost to it. So Tyler, did you have anything that you were thinking about as we were talking about all this?
Yeah, I'm actually really happy to be humming a similar tune to Murray on this one. I don't at all like I'm not trying to disavow things that Goggins says. I respect him greatly. I mean, it's amazing the feats that he does, and I think he serves as a wonderful, if not absurd, example of what the mind is capable of doing. But I think that our minds and our bodies, they slow us down for reasons, right? They protect us actually sometimes from insanity or injury. And sometimes when you get to a point where you have completely shut off those switches, it may look really good and be very notable, some of the things you can do with it, but over the long term, there can be some really detrimental effects in your personal life and your physical life. I saw one particular video. I think Joe Rogan loves this guy. Shared of David Goggins when he went on some long race, and I can't remember exactly what it was that happened, but he actually had to be hospitalized, and they took him in the hospital. They had to do a number of things, and he literally like leaves the hospital and then goes and finishes the race. And it's like, that's really cool, like there's a lesson to be learned there, but also don't do that,
Right.
like understand, like, for him, maybe that makes some sense because that is his identity, like pushing past those limits and just taking whatever negative detrimental effects come from it and just trying to show other people what's possible. Maybe that's him, but I really caution people to think that in order to get to where they want to go, they need to be David Goggins and be able to push past those limits. And I think Murray is so right in saying that you're going to end up pushing a lot of people away if you become that type of person and really shut off those internal switches that are telling you, hey, maybe you're going a little bit over the top. I've had periods of my life where I think I've been a little bit too extreme. Like I had a point in my dental school life where I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a day and or a night rather. And and like I was humming along with that, and I was like, man, I can just not sleep. Like this is great. I have so much more time, and I can do so much more. But I'm also like a young guy, and it did catch up to me eventually, and I got burnt out, and I just was on like a sleep bender. And things that can feel good and like be really like awesome and you can be braggadocious about, they do come with consequences, and it's easy to hide those and then talk about how you only slept cumulatively like 20 hours in a week. So that's a bit of a tangent, but I think that Goggins serves as a fantastic, absurd example of what we're capable of and how our mind stops us short of what we're actually capable of doing. But you have to proceed with caution and understand that it's, there's a negative side to that too.
Well, cool. Well, and he literally uses the notion of a governor, like on a car, there's a
Exactly.
governor that prevents it from going past a certain mile per hour.
Yeah. That's not
And
weakness.
what's that?
That's not just weakness,
Right.
like it's not something you need to extinguish from your body. It's there for a reason.
Not only is there danger to yourself and others on the highway, there's also danger to the vehicle if you're always taking it to
Right.
that high of a speed.
You're losing some mileage on that. Yeah.
So all this to say, Goggins is like a medicine that you got to use correctly. That sometimes you need a little Goggins and sometimes you need a little less Goggins. Uh, and it's up to you to know like where you are at that life and or where you are in that point of your life and whether or not um, you need someone else's perspective. And I think Murray, what you're saying earlier, checking in with your loved ones of like, am I being
Yes.
too extreme?
Yeah.
Is probably an easy way to figure out if where you are on the spectrum.
Well, and to be fair, I mean, what the great thing that Goggins did is he took some negative, self-defeating thought patterns that were not getting him what he wanted, and he found a way to turn those around and enable him to get things that he wanted, right, which is great. So if you're not, your life is organized to get the results you're currently getting, right? It's perfectly organized to get that. And if you're not getting the results you want, then you ought to be looking at your thought patterns to see, are you creating are you creating some of those problems, including giving up on things when you could be putting in more work. So there's definitely a time and place, and for him, it worked for him in his life. The question, I'd really love to hear this guy talk when he's 60 years old to see what he's learned, because it's a journey, right? For all these books, I had a professor in college who said, when you read a book, you learn more about the author than you do about the subject, right? And so all these books we're talking about authors and what they say. And I'm getting ready to write a book, so I understand that as well. So it's great to learn about that, and great role model. If you need your butt kicked, go read them.
Okay, perfect. Well, let's turn it over to you then, Murray. So, what was your book, and what's the context for you, and how it impacted you?
Sure. My book is a book by Warren Bennis. It's called On Becoming a Leader. And there's a little bit of backstory, and there'll be a little bit of forward story as well. And it connects to what we just talked about. When I was a teenager, I loved two things. I loved sports, and I actually loved leadership. As like 13-year-old boy, what I loved is I loved to look at great leaders in sports and politics and business. And my entire life, I always thought I wanted to become a leader. That was something that I absolutely idolized and studied. It was more of a sidekick rather than my full time day job. Because I started my career as an accountant. I worked for Arthur Andersen as a CPA, and then when I went back to school, I ended up finding this field called organizational behavior, and one of the subspecialties in this field was called leadership. And I thought, you can study this, you can make it would just blew me away that you could study and make money doing leadership stuff. And at that time, I had been extremely driven. Graduated from college with lots of money, bought a home because of a business I'd started. Did really well at Arthur Andersen, early promotions. I even started a group. It was a society where I got a bunch of business people together. So I'd done all these wonderful things. And then I switched from what I would call the world of finance and black and white to the world of leadership and organizational behavior. And I remember Warren Bennis at the time was kind of like Brene Brown is today. I mean, he was the hot #1 leadership guru. I mean, described by Forbes and Wall Street Journal as the best leadership thinker. The most legitimate leadership thinker of his day. And I'm reading this book, and I read a line in the book, and one of the things that Bennis did talk about, much like Brene Brown, was authenticity and experience and ethics and being genuine. And one of the lines in his book, he said, really good leaders don't seek to become leaders, they seek to become themselves. And then eventually other people follow. And I remember reading that line going, I've been trying to be a leader for 15 years here. And if real leaders don't seek to become leaders, they seek to become themselves. The next question I had was, who am I?
Mm-hmm.
And that began, and I was only 28 years old. And I think this can happen to people in dental school. This can happen to people at any time in their lives, where people start saying, who am I? What am I all about? What are my values? What matters? And I had a genuine midlife crisis. I call it a premature midlife crisis in my late 20s. And that was between my first and second year of business school. And my second year of business school, I literally did 1/10 of the work that I did in my first year. I consciously chose to do the minimum amount of work possible. And then after I graduated, I took 10 months off. I don't know if you remember that or not. I refused to get a job because I just wanted to go out and find myself.
Wasn't that the Christmas that we made each other Christmas presents and all that, or was
that was the Richard Saves Christmas. Yes, that was the Richard Saves Christmas story from our family lore. Because I refused to work, and we had 3 kids at the time, and So now that was a little bit later, but at any rate, that book caused me to reflect on and that task: who am I, and what's my life going to be, and where do I go with it? And I felt like it was on such a treadmill. I'm like a hamster on a hamster wheel, going so fast that I never stepped back to say, what is in this for me, and what is in this for others, and why would anyone want to follow my leadership? I just assumed that a leader was someone who took on power and authority and responsibility, and all of a sudden ends up being in charge and can boss people around, right? That was my concept of a leader. So it literally changed in some ways, the course and trajectory of my graduate studies in my life by really forcing me to step back and forcing me to ask what was important. And Bennis, by the way, so he was a professor at USC, Southern California. I think he grew up in the Bronx in New York, but like many leadership guys, made it out west. And he wrote 30 books on leadership.
Oh, wow.
But I think his best book that he wrote on leadership was on becoming a leader, and he talks about the genuine struggle or the genuine path in life that everyone needs to find. And that was what set me on the quest of what's the genuine path in life that I need to find for myself. And it was just such a revelation to realize there was a path in life that I needed to find. And it took me a long time to find it in some ways. And in some ways it got me on a new path the moment I read that.
It almost seems like it was a little bit of a painful path at first. Like reading that was both a really good revelation, and then also in some, externally, if you were to just look at the immediate outcomes, also like a very kind of destructive, difficult phase.
Yeah, it's like I had a professor who described a crisis, a midlife crisis is where you get wound up so tight, and you get more and more structure, and you get, again, it's like a clock or a spring, and you wind it up, and all of a sudden it springs. Then all of a sudden everything, you go from having everything figured out to nothing figured out. And I had nothing figured out. I'm talking about spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, with my relationships. I remember going home and talking to Nadine, my wife, and telling her one day, and when this midlife crisis was happening, I said, I'm not sure what I believe anymore. I'm not sure what I believe religiously. I'm not sure what I believe about a bunch of things. I said, I'm kind of mad at I became mad at everything. I'm kind of mad. I said, I'm kind of mad at you. I'm mad at God. I'm mad at, but I said, I'm not going to go out and buy a sports car. Number one, I'm not 40. I don't have enough money to buy a sports car. And then I said, number two, I'm not going to throw you away, even though even the institution of marriage sounds stupid to me at this point in time. Again, going through a major midlife crisis, when that happens, it's a process of deconstruction where everything you liked at a certain point in time, you now hate. And that's the good part about that, is then you can sort things out and say, okay, what is really important and what isn't really important. So no, it's a very painful process. I had some really, really, really supportive professors at university who were there, but my parents were freaking out. Nadine was kind of freaking out because we didn't have any money. And one day she looked at me, and she said, I think we had some milk in the fridge, and we had some peanut butter and some bread and some cereal. And she looked at me and said, I think I'm going to go live with my dad until you figure things out here. And I said to her, just hang on here. I did this consulting project. The check's in the mail. We'll have money tomorrow. And we did. We had money the next day, fortunately. But Nadine was ready to leave me and take you and the kids up to a place where there was food. So, it's a very self-destructive process, but it has to be done in order. There is wisdom on the other side of struggle. If all you do is, you succeed at everything in your life, and you've never had a struggle, never had a problem, you're not going to gain the wisdom and calmness and serenity. So that was it was a catalyst for me that I really appreciated, and have recommended people who really are curious about leadership to read Warren Bennis on Becoming a Leader.
Okay, it's on the list. I don't know what to add to that. I mean, really, in all honesty, Tyler, it looks like you had something to say.
Well, I'm just kind of curious because I kind of got a little bit lost in all that. So did the book careen you into a midlife crisis, or did it help you emerge from one?
No, I was starting to head there.
I need to know what I'm getting into if I'm going to read this book.
Yeah, it careened me into it. No, it got. So I was already starting to question a bunch of stuff. I had already made a change from the hard world of numbers into the soft, the black and white world of accounting to the gray world. So I had already made probably a journey that was taking me that direction. And then when I read that, I just lost all of it. So this will challenge potentially, if it has the impact on you. It might ask you to challenge some of the basic assumptions you have about who you are and why you're doing what you're doing and what it matters matters to you. So no, this is read with read carefully, right?
Yeah, we have some dangerous books tonight.
All of these come with caveats.
Hunter, what do you think?
Yeah, so it's funny because what you're saying is actually making me call an audible on the book that I'm going to talk about. But I just recently in the practice, I've just been thinking about this, just both in the practice and with one of my close friends, kind of going through what you're describing. Some of these hard times that kind of make you question everything, and I kind of felt like I went through that with this person in a way, where I was really challenged myself, kind of empathizing, and I think that is so crucial and essential to just our life experience. Like, in fact, it's like you don't know what you don't know. You know what I mean? And you just have to go through it. There's no other way. There is no other way to figure it out besides just get in there and kind of muscle through it and have the experience. And if you can do it the right way and endure, typically you come out a better person, no matter how painful it is. I just had a lot of thoughts about it, and I can relate to. I'm a little bit older than you were, and I wouldn't say that I'm in a midlife crisis, but I've been having some of those same thoughts, as I just bought half this practice and really spent, quite a bit of money and just really put my whole family. I moved my family across the country from my favorite place in the world, Arizona, to Florida. For the first few months, I just said, what have I done? Like, what have I done? And so, yeah, I that's definitely a book I want to read. I think that would be really, really enlightening for me. So.
The thing that just came to mind as you were saying that is there's nothing like almost parting with or almost losing or being willing to part with things to like figure out what you truly value. Like when everything is on the chopping block, it has the impact of forcing you to decide what is important to me, what do I care about. And I think Murray, some of this came from and a lot of this can come from when you're doing things for the wrong reason for a long time. And then it all comes crashing together. And I think some of that, you had some of that potentially going on, of being very driven, but not necessarily for the right reasons. And the reasons matter, or some of it being more external than internal. I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, but what comes to mind when I say that?
Well, I think I was being driven for driven's sake. I'm a very achievement-oriented person, and I love to achieve. And I never stepped back. It was like I was living an unexamined life. And I think what Hunter was saying is, you need to step back and examine your life and examine what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I never really thought that was even part of, like, really, I can do that. I can step back and think about why I'm doing what I'm doing, and should I be doing this? And are there other things, like you said, putting it all on the chopping block? So I think I just had lived an unexamined life and was down a pathway that I probably set for myself when I was too young, and certainly needed the opportunity to step back. And I think you either do that, or you end up kind of checking out of life when you're about 40 and you coast for the last 25 years of your life. I think if you don't step back and examine your life, then I think the latter part, the part that you guys aren't in yet, becomes a much different thing for you. So it certainly adds richness as you move ahead.
Okay, so On Becoming a Leader by Warren Bennis. I said that right?
Yep.
Okay. So Hunter, you called an audible on yours. So what was your book, and what was the context of that for you?
Yeah, so as I was listening to Murray, kind of talk about, appreciate you being so vulnerable, by the way, Murray. I think that was cool. I really enjoyed listening to you talk about that. But it made me think about an experience, because as you invited me to share a book, and there's a handful, and I told you earlier, of the books that I really like, and one of those books, I'm actually going to go back and talk about this one, but it's called The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. And so in 2008, I went and I lived in India, and I did, like, the door-to-door summer sales the year before, and I was able to support myself, for the next school year, including the next summer. So I didn't make any money. They flew me over there and paid my way, but I just went and volunteered. And I never forget, I landed, and driving from the airport in Chennai, which is on the east coast of India, we had about a 2-hour drive into this rural area where this school is. And I just remember being in the city, and everybody's honking their horns, and it smells really bad. And there's just people everywhere. And I remember distinctly, like, the sidewalks are super crowded. And there was this guy, and there was no room on the sidewalks, but there was a guy on like a four-wheeled, looked like a furniture dolly, like a four-wheeled cart on his chest. He was like a W amputee with his legs, but he was pulling himself with his hands, like scooting himself with his hands, and his chest was on this board. And I'll never forget that mental image. And when I was in India, I like my first 2 weeks were like a real mental challenge because I had never seen anything like it. Being in the States pretty much my whole life, I traveled a little bit abroad, but nothing like that. And it was like it was like spiritually challenging, mentally challenging, and I had a really hard time with the amount of suffering, the amount of poverty. I mean, like the way that like they were starting these local villages where I was. I would go for a run in the morning with like, my iPod or whatever I had at that time, and here they are starting a fire to heat up their water for breakfast. And it was just super humbling, and it was just really incredible. And I really had a challenge mentally my first 2 weeks, and I started reading this book called The Problem of Pain. And I'm just going to read, I just have a quick line from it, but it's kind of the premise of the book. He says, if God were good, so just C.S. Lewis to back up a little bit, if you don't know anything about him, probably heard his name before, but he was an atheist, and he's a bit of a philosopher, but there came a period in his life where he becomes a Christian, believes in God, and so he kind of goes on for the cause of Christ, if you will, but he writes these different books, the Screw Tape Letters. He has a lot of really famous books, but
like Light from the Wardrobe is probably
more known for that, but like the philosophical books. But he says, this is a line from The Problem of Pain. It's kind of the preface of the book, but he says, if God were good, he would wish to make his creatures perfectly happy, and if God were almighty, he would be able to do what he wished. But the creatures are not happy. Therefore, God lacks either goodness or power or both. This is the problem of pain in its simplest form. But he goes on to just kind of break that down. And what I learned, so I remember I was 2 weeks into this trip, I was just kind of like on my own for the most part. We were preparing for volunteers would come over from the States. And so my job, I was in charge of, there was a medical side of the trip and then like a tutoring side of the trip. And so I was organizing these programs, and I was in the business program at BYU. So I thought it was really cool making these Excel spreadsheets and doing all this stuff. And one night I was sitting on my laptop, a monsoon had just come through, and I just had this really peaceful feeling. And I went for a walk, and in this room, there's like these tiny rooms, and there was a family that was employed by the organization. It was a mother, a father, and then two kids. And they had like a tiny little, like old TV, grass mats on a concrete floor. And like, that was their house. And then they slept in another room. So they had two, probably 8x8 rooms, and they didn't own it. They just stayed there. And they probably had like 2 or 3 changes of clothes. And that was really what they owned. But I walked by their room, and I saw the 4 of them just sitting there watching TV, just hanging out as a family, just being together on these 3 or 4 grass mats. And it kind of clicked that night that like our definition of happiness, isn't the same. And these people were so content, so happy because they had what really mattered to them. Obviously I'm not trying to breeze past the importance of having the basic necessities of life. Obviously they were, they had the essentials, but they had each other. And not to be too cliche or cheesy, but these people were genuinely way more happy than a lot of people I know in the States. Big houses, fancy cars, all these things that they just aren't happy deep down inside. And here's this family that's just completely content. And so this book just kind of walked me through that. And kind of like what Marie was saying, is it's like you have to go through these really difficult things, and pain is part of that process. You can't get from point A to point B without the pain, without the suffering. And if you try to take shortcuts, it just doesn't work out, and you don't become who you're supposed to be. And that's a big part of like my personal religious belief, of like you mentioned, Richard, being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Just suffering is necessary, pain is necessary, and even when it doesn't seem fair, it's just part of the process. And it's just this weird dichotomy in life that you've got to have the bitter to enjoy the sweet. And so it's just a book that I've shared a lot with people that have gone through some really hard things. And it's kind of a deep read in some parts, and it's written a bit ago, so the language doesn't really roll off the tongue. You kind of got to sit down and dig into it. But if you're willing to sit and think and ponder, and if that's your thing, this is a book that I've referenced many times and I've given out many times because it had a huge impact on me that summer.
So not one to listen at 2.5x while you're doing something else.
Definitely not one to kind of casually listen to on the way to work. It's probably one that you got to sit down and read.
I love that concept of sometimes some people's entire life can be, how can I avoid pain, or how can I avoid anything of difficulty, and how is pain fair? And you can get caught up in a lot of that. But instead, learning from and leaning into that pain is where some of the joy of life really comes from, is making it through those really, really hard times. Um, Murray, is there any thoughts that come to mind when you're hearing all this?
Yeah, my favorite line from all time movie lines from The Princess Bride, right? Life is pain. Anyone who tells you anything else is trying to sell you something. So, it's just the reality is we all have problems. We all experience pain, and we lean into those problems and learn from them and grow from them. And again, I'm not saying you should go out and seek it and find it, but it will come. You don't have to go and seek pain. It will problems, issues, challenges. They will find you, and when they do, sit with them and learn from them. And yeah, great advice. Love, interesting book. I'm going to write it down.
Yeah, I love C.S. Lewis. One of my favorites is The Great Divorce. Um, and I won't get too into it, but it's essentially a bunch of people who've died and go on this bus, and they can go to heaven if they want to, but they have to part with the things that, like, their vices in life. Um, and essentially it all comes down to, they all get back on the bus other than one guy. Like, everyone is basically chooses the things that are the most destructive to themselves. They end up embracing, and really makes you think deeply about, what am I choosing to embrace in my life, and what is the outcome of that. So Tyler, we've gone down a little bit of a religious road that we didn't expect to. What are you thinking?
Please save us, Tyler. Please, just totally help us out here.
I knew I was coming into a pretty loaded room here. I'm really just drinking all this in, and I appreciate everyone being so humble and transparent with very transformative experiences that they've had in their lives. And I'm with you guys in this hole here. I'm okay with talking about pain. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna rescue us from it. I think it's an important conversation to have. I think that if we live in avoidance of pain, or have this relationship with it where we think we need to change the circumstances of our lives in order to avoid them, instead of changing our own relationship with pain, we're really just going to keep bumping up against the same obstacles. And I think to keep moving forward, we have to change our relationship with that. And I think that, what Hunter just shared was really beautiful. I mean, we're definitely taking sort of an ontological, spin on these sorts of things. But I mean, even if that's not necessarily speaking to you as much, I think anyone can relate to the experience of pain and whatever sort of mechanisms they have for dealing with it currently, that may not be perfectly healthy or optimum, or informing how they should do so in the future. So I'm writing that book down too, as well.
Well, cool. Let's hit this last one. I think this is going to be a little bit less caveat inducing. So
yeah,
Tyler, share with us the edited version of your title.
Yeah, well, it is The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F. So I think I can leave that word out for the sake of the show, and for being only about 25% of the room that actually uses that word on rare, inappropriate at times occasions.
We kept the explicit rating off of Shared Practices. George's new show with Ashley, Dental Friends with Benefits. There's plenty of that. So if you're looking for that, we have that too.
Oh, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful show. It's being very well received.
But yeah, I will highlight the episode that I've enjoyed the most recently is with Paul Etchison, where they talk about how much it sucks to be a parent. I felt that was very Hunter. We kind of were having a conversation about this earlier this last week. We were talking about present parenting. That's an episode that I'll send you the link for. It was
Please do, man. I just spent like an hour and a half like changing batteries on my boat and trying to get my kids out on the boat, and it was I did not have, I lacked in the patients department. So yeah, being a parent can be very difficult.
No, and this won't help with the patience. It'll just help you realize it sucks, and that's part of it. And
That's what I need. I just need some coping mechanisms. That'd be great.
yeah. All right. So back to the subtle art of not giving a freak. I think that's the
Yeah.
official
Okay.
term that we can use. I don't know. Whatever.
Right. That's the abridged version. Yeah, absolutely. So, unfortunately, I don't really have a huge life-altering event or phase in my life to really relate this book to. I don't. This actually, I I think that Murray actually mentioned something about making certain decisions at a young time in your life where that you kind of set yourself up for where you're going to be for like the next 10 or 15 years, and you make these decisions very early on in life, and you kind of find yourself in a situation and end up finding yourself in the middle of it or after it. I kind of felt that way about dentistry in general for a long time, because if you want to get into dental school in the traditional pathway, you have to be setting up for that far before you're really able to make mature, long lasting decisions about your life. Right. I mean, as I was going through high school, I had to set myself to get into a decent college. As I'm in college, I had to set myself up to be eligible for getting into dental school out of school. And so like, you're just constantly getting, caught up in this process of doing that thing. And living that non-examined life was me, like all the way up until I was probably 2021 at least, where it was just doing things because I was supposed to or I was told to. And I never took stock of who I was or why I was doing it at all. Most of it was really just impressions of, people's opinions of me or what I thought I ought to be doing, given this idea that I was smart or I did well on tests and I need to make a lot of money at some point. And so really, honestly, I mean, I would have never said this in my dental school interviews, but I was sort of just led to dentistry. I didn't lead myself to it. I didn't find it myself. And
the thing to do.
It was just the thing to do. And I've been hoping that I would just get, discovered or something and like, find myself in a career that was more exciting or non-traditional. And it just didn't happen. I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm at that, I'm at this point in my life where I just have to make a decision on what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And dentistry just it's teed up. So that's what I ended up doing. And I was at a crossroads, and I got to reading some books. I had gotten a job at a dental lab, and not because I really wanted to be in a dental lab, but because it would make my application look better. This is coming back to doing things that I'm just supposed to do, not because I'm necessarily trying to or want to do it. And I was kind of put off in the CAD CAM department, and I was just scanning a bunch of models, and I was like really quick at it, and I could get all my stuff done in like half the day. And for the other half of the day, I just had to look like I was doing something. And so in order to do that, I was reading books and I was annotating and writing things down and just looking particularly busy at my desk job. Which, by the way, Terry, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry. I mean, I did get my work done, but yes, half the day I was on the clock just reading books. But yeah, so up until that time, I really had not engaged myself in any sort of self-help books. I had a very different impression of what they were and who they were for. I felt that a self-help book, inherent in the idea that there are self-help books, is that they're for people who need help. I was never a person to think that I needed help. That to me was like an admission of weakness at the time. And I felt like if I were reading a book like that, it was like admitting there was something was wrong with me. And so I had a kind of hard time just like getting over that ridiculous obstacle in my life. And so I was sort of looking through some different, books that could potentially benefit me, getting into the dental industry and business and stuff like that. And I've been led into that with different influences in my life I don't really need to get into, but I came across this book that was a bestseller. So this is not an obscure book by any means. And most of you have probably heard of this or seen it on the Amazon bestseller list or something like that. And so it's a book written by Mark Manson. He started off as a blogger, and basically he is sort of the self-help anti-hero. There was a big push for positivity, mental positivity, sort of like I don't know if it's an avoidance of pain, but just sort of doubling down on like making yourself happy and convincing yourself that you're happy or that you're beautiful and in different types of ways. And he sort of worked against that and made that out to be a source of of why people keep feeling like there's something they don't have or something they need more of, because they're having to try so hard to convince themselves that they're happy or that they're grateful or that their lives are working. And so he wrote this book, and it's honestly kind of difficult for me to really sum up what it really means. I think the title gives this sort of impression that it's about not caring or something, or just like just being that type of person, and it's not. It's really about caring more about the things that matter, and also sort of being a little bit more real about what the human experience is. So I'll pick out a quote. I have a few of them here, but just to kind of speak to what we were talking about. So the desire for a more positive experience is in itself a negative experience. And paradoxically, the acceptance of one's negative experiences is in itself a positive experience. And for me, being able to sort of embrace the fact that I was actually in a pretty negative spot in my life where I felt like I had put myself in a predetermined situation and I didn't really have a way out of it, kind of gave me some solidarity. I wasn't like constantly trying to tell myself that I was being successful by graduating college and trying to get into dental school. Like I needed to figure out like what I was really doing this for. And it took me being at one with the fact that I was in a negative spot and I needed to actually get some help and find new mechanisms for reflecting on that, that really helped me out a lot. And so that's just kind of the significance that it had in my life, and it helped me reprioritize, and it set a new stage for how I was going to interpret self-help resources down the road, and my whole experience of life, and being able to express the positives and the negatives as part of my journey.
It actually ties right back into what Hunter was talking about just a minute ago.
Yeah, exactly.
And I really liked that quote and the way that he phrased that. And essentially, it's desiring to be in a state that you're not in right now is where a lot of suffering comes from.
Exhausting.
I don't want this. And instead of embracing your life, your circumstances, there's this sense of angst of missing out, of grass is greener, of wanting that next thing. And I've been listening to a lot of meditation Buddhist related podcasts, and a lot of Buddhism and a lot of meditation centers around the difference between desire, just following impulses, versus taking a step back and being present with the current experience rather than trying to live in some future state.
That's
and
great.
Something that I really suck at, and I have to be reminded of over and over and over. But it's a kind of a common theme that it sounds like has been through a couple of these books. This is the Midlife Crisis book club here. This is, I didn't expect this all to be this heavy. This is good.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so the good part about the book you mentioned here, Tyler, is we take ourselves far too seriously, and to be able to step back and say, you know what, all of us suck at some things, and let's embrace the things we suck at and not worry about, comparison is a thief of joy. And if I start comparing my dental practice to Richard's dental practice, or Hunter's endodontic practice, most people, when they tell their story, they tell the good parts and they leave out all the bad parts, right? And so we live this fairy tale life, assuming that it's going to go well. But now you embrace the negative, as he says, embrace the negative. Don't try to be the best at everything you can be, and again, just don't take things so seriously. There's some real wisdom in that, and I think you can't. Anything taken to the extreme, any virtue taken to an extreme becomes a vice, including positivity, including your first book around, so anything we do to an extreme becomes a limiting factor and a weakness rather than a strength. And so,
for sure,
caring a little less, stepping back, not taking ourselves as seriously, accepting the negative, that's great advice, actually. And I think it ties directly into everything we've talked about here.
For sure. Yeah. That's why I picked that one out. Yeah.
Hunter, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, my thought too is just as it relates to dentistry, I try to live my life in a way, and I'm definitely not, I'm definitely working on it, but is not kind of missing the mark of why we do things. Exactly what you said, just kind of going into industry just because it was the thing to do. And I was probably a little bit like that too, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
But as it relates to dentistry now, when you start, looking at your schedule and you see like a procedure rather than a person, I think you lose a lot of the kind of the fun part of what we do. Sometimes we get going so fast, and I'm guilty of this too. We run like a pretty efficient practice. And so, where I get behind is when I talk to people too much. It's like, and that's what I like though. That's what I like to do. I like to put people at ease. Hey, we're going to have a root canal, have a few laughs, and like get people, in and out. But sometimes, you lose, it gets so hectic and so busy that we're missing out on our career and what we do. And then it becomes about, well, this guy did how many cases today compared to me? And then it becomes a numbers game, and we start missing the whole point, and you start making more money, and then it's to what end, to what end? And that's just the thought that I had. And, you can go into social media and all the dental groups online, and this guy's doing this and this guy's doing that. And it can become pretty deflating if you're not careful. And so I think it's really important to step back and say, what really makes me happy? And I know during my days, my busiest days where I make the most money, those are definitely not my happiest days. It's the ones where, like, I worked a half day today. I can tell you the name of every patient from today. And it was definitely a less stressful, more enjoyable day for me. And so just as far as it relates to dentistry, it's really important to keep in perspective, I think, what are we doing here? And at the end of the day, the money's going to work itself out. It's just, you got to find joy in the journey and just kind of enjoy it. And I think, like we were saying with Murray earlier, though, like, I think you kind of have to go through that phase in life to realize, all right, this isn't that fun. Like, this isn't really that great. And back up and just make sure you're not missing the mark, on why we're doing what we're doing. And that can be applied in anything. So.
Well, I think you just wrapped it up with a bow. I mean, I have nothing to add. That was fantastic. Thank you all for joining us, for sharing your books, for sharing your experiences, and getting real. And I think if someone's on the verge of a midlife crisis, hopefully this episode gets them full bore into that, and they can just lean in and suffer for like 4 or 5 years. They're going to come out great on the other side. But this episode has kicked them off on a long, painful journey.
Absolutely.
I'm ready for my midlife crisis.
It's a great journey. It's a painful, but it is a lovely. It's a great journey.
Tyler, you're primed. We're setting you up. Okay.
I know. I just turned 26 this past week, so if I'm tracking with Murray, man, I'm going headlong into this thing. So
ripe and ready.
Yeah, I won't be alone though. I got a community.
You need to like invest like pre-bubble into something too, so you can have like a financial midlife crisis. Like if the real estate market was about to blow up, it'd be a good time to invest, and then you can just really reevaluate everything.
Yeah, it's time. I don't have enough on the line yet.
Nope. No, yeah, sure. $500,000 of debt. That wasn't enough. So
I'll work on it. I'll get it right on it.
well, that's it. That was another amazing Shared Practices book club. So thank you guys. We'll see you later.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, I didn't know it was going to go that way. I didn't know, and I asked Murray, I asked my dad to bring for him what was. I asked everyone to bring a book that had meaning to them, that changed them in some way, and what the context of that was for them. And so, I purposefully didn't want book clubs that were just here's the bullet points. Let's discuss this in a silo. Books have the power, podcasts have the power, books have the power to change a life and to put you on a different course than you were before. And I think that's where a lot of the power of shared experience comes from. And I think that's one of the most powerful things of shared practices is the ability to learn from other people's journeys. And that's what we got today. So I really enjoyed that. Hopefully you did as well. I had a lot of fun. And like I said in the intro, if you're interested, post on our Facebook group. If you've got a really good book to discuss and how it impacted you, I'd love to have you on the show and let's talk about it. So we'll talk with you next time on the Shared Practices podcast.